We're the middle children of history, man. No purpose or place. We have no Great War, no Great Depression. Our Great War is a spiritual war. Our Great Depression is our lives.
David Fincher's Fight Club is a marvel. It's a hurricane of scenes, themes, and punches. In a short 2 hours, the film takes you and your unnamed narrator through support groups and skirmishes into the heart of the American man in the late 1990s, a fever dream of masculinity and consumerism. His unhappiness is our unhappiness. His confusion, our confusion. And his crisis is indicative of the male crisis of our current age. The movie revolves around this narrator, who will henceforth be referred to as Jack, who represents a microcosm of the feelings of the typical young American man. Jack is a straight, white male, a white-collar worker without significant relationships. Jack also suffers from insomnia. And Jack is deeply unhappy. He's so unhappy, in fact, that he feigns having testicular cancer so that he can attend support groups for men, where he can cry and let out his emotions. That is, until Jack happens upon Tyler Durden, who seems to have everything Jack lacks in his life. He's handsome, confident, strong, and womanizing. Tyler is the embodiment of masculinity as it's known today. Tyler teaches Jack to fight, and the two set up a fight club, hint hint nudge nudge, in which men gather in secret to engage in the most masculine action that there is: combat. Oh, and by the way, spoilers for this 25-year-old movie. After months of this underground activity, Tyler decides to escalate their plan and enact Project Mayhem, an attempt to revert society to a pre-industrialist state by destroying the servers of credit card companies so that men could be...
You're stalking out through the damn canyon forest around the ruins of Rockefeller Center.
Before the plan can be completed, however, Jack and Tyler talk in a hotel room. Jack, bewildered as to why people continually confuse him with Tyler, finally confronts him about the issue, when Jack suddenly has the realization that...
Because we're the same person.
Tyler is not another person, but rather a separate identity which Jack maintains while asleep. Following this revelation, Jack and Tyler have a final confrontation before Project Mayhem finally happens, and Jack shoots himself to get Tyler out of his head for good. The movie ends with the corporate buildings exploding as Jack holds hands with Marla, the woman whose affection he has desired since the start of the film. Fight Club on the surface might seem like little more than hyper-masculine, anarchist propaganda piece, which amounts to just macho porn, as some critics have put it. Yet, beneath the gore and the action and the dark comedy lies a much deeper, much more poignant message. Because despite seemingly glorifying much of the violence and masculinity portrayed in the narrative, the movie can also be interpreted as both a criticism of consumer culture in America and a critique of toxic masculinity, which addresses the cultural shifts that have left men feeling lost.
Our fathers were models for God. If our fathers bailed, what does that tell you about God?
No, I don't.
Listen to me. You have to consider the possibility that God does not like you. He never wanted you. In all probability, he hates you. This is not the worst thing that can happen.
It isn't.
We don't need him.
Fight Club was released in 1999 to moderate commercial success and mixed critical reviews. The late 90s, and 1999 in particular, were a bustling, anxious period, yet they were tense for Americans especially. Computers and the internet were quickly becoming more relevant, music and entertainment underwent sweeping changes, and the collapse of the USSR finally marked the end of the Cold War. Distrust in the government following Nixon's impeachment was only further exacerbated by the impeachment of President Clinton just 2 decades later. In Freudian psychoanalysis, the father represents authority and power, while the mother represents caregiving and nature. Though now largely defunct, the proliferation of psychoanalysis has led many of these themes to seep into popular culture throughout the years, especially in the decades following the peak of Freud's popularity. Lance Morrow's review of the works by male activist Robert Bly comments on the psychoanalytical importance of the erosion of trust in the government. The 60s taught that the authority of fathers was defunct. The boomers functioned as siblings without fathers. Is it the case now they are looking for the vanished father within themselves? Mark Ramey's book Studying Fight Club explores the implications of this distrust within the film, particularly in relation to Tyler's comment that the men of the 90s are
A generation of men raised by women.
Both Jack and Tyler make reference to a father who has abandoned them. Raimi posits then that Jack is seeking the moral compass and authority by which to see his life. He tries to replace the literal and metaphorical father that has abandoned him. This distrust in government and authority coincided with a perpetual uneasiness and anxiety about the state of the future. While Americans experienced a technological revolution, the perceived Y2K bug in computers threatened to collapse the newly digitized global infrastructure. The dot-com bubble was nearing its peak, and confidence in the security of the market was starting to degrade. Americans were living through a time of economic prosperity, yet it was difficult for many to enjoy that prosperity fully. The shifting culture also led to the third wave of feminism in the United States, which built upon the strides made by prominent feminists in the 60s and 70s and introduced the new girl power movement. This new era of feminism helped once again to shift the power imbalance present between men and women closer to an equal playing field. However, as is explored in many of the texts surrounding Fight Club, this was not met without resistance. It's also important to note that while the reception of the film was not entirely negative or positive, it took time for critics and academics alike to fully digest the meaning of the film. While this led to many disapproving of it, it also led to many, especially men, resonating with the messages the film seemed to endorse sarcastically. Fans of Fight Club have garnered a reputation as being similar to the hypermasculine caricatures in the movie. This is because, for many young men especially, the subtext of the film has gone over their heads, and instead of condemning the actions of the characters, they glorify them.
My dad never went to college, so it's real important that I go.
Sounds familiar.
So I graduate, I call him up long distance. I said, Dad, now what? He says, get a job.
Same here.
Now I'm 25. Make my yearly call again. See, Dad, now what? He says, I don't know. Get married.
You can't get married. I'm a 30-year-old boy.
Advocates on both sides of the political aisle will reference the male crisis, but aren't always exactly clear about what that actually is. So, to ensure that I'm being more transparent than the posturing congressman or the course-peddling scammer, I'll outline the statistics that I've based my concept of the male crisis around. I also think it's important to note that these figures, as well as much of the analysis in this video, only reflect people who identify as either male or female. Those who identify outside of that binary face their own, even more complex issues, something that I would feel would deserve its own video entirely. With that said, women currently comprise 58% of college students, and 66% of women enroll in college after high school, compared to just 57% of men. Graduation rates for both high school and college are also substantially higher for women than men. These figures are of great importance, because the earnings potential for college graduates are substantially higher than high school graduates. Men are also 3 times as likely to overdose, 4 times as likely to commit suicide, and 14 times as likely to be incarcerated than women. The causes for these staggering statistical differences are varied, and I think being skeptical of those causes is important. In my experience, people will tend to assign the largest portion of blame to whatever reinforces their pre-existing beliefs. In reality, whether absentee fatherism, a rise in women-exclusive programs, a systemic bias against men in the classroom, or something completely different is the culprit, we can't know that for sure. But that doesn't stop grifters from attempting, sometimes successfully, to breach into a discontented young male audience with a confident assertion of their problems as well as all of the solutions. Young men tend to fall into these cults of personality that preach masculinity because they've grown up in a society that has only ever told them that their masculinity is a burden. But the reality is that the real reason they join them is not because they feel the need to become a real man. It's out of loneliness or out of desperation. In all likelihood, what these young men want is just for someone to care for them, to value them. They just want a friend. And so, someone telling them that they have value simply for being a man is appealing. It's more than that, it's enlightening. The cult of Project Mayhem turns out men willing to die for their cause, because for the first time in their lives, someone has told them that they're worth something. But these cults of personality are not the only option. And in fact, as Fight Club shows us, they are often the most destructive option.
Do you know what a duvet is?
Comfort.
It's a blanket. Just a blanket. Now, why do guys like you and I know what a duvet is? Is this essential to our survival in the hunter-gatherer sense of the word? No. What are we then?
Consumers.
The shift in American society post-World War II towards a more corporate and consumerist culture, especially in the workplace, was experienced fundamentally differently by men and women. This is primarily because this change was mainly empowering for women, who had previously had very few options for employment. Conversely, while this shift constituted a positive shift in the power balance for women, for men it represented a disruption of identity. Where men had previously had a very defined role in society as the sole breadwinner, that position was now being challenged. As women moved from a defined but confining role to a more flexible and powerful one, men were left without clear direction as to what their role in society now was. However, a young man living in the late 90s such as Jack is, wouldn't have been alive during a time period when this wasn't already the status quo. This then prompts the question at the heart of the discussion of the male crisis today. For men who haven't known any difference, where would the crisis of masculinity arise from? The answer, to me at least, lies in the cultural zeitgeist. Because the cultural definition of masculinity and the symbols associated with it didn't change while the gender norms of the time did, it left men confused, lost. They were both told that a man must take care of his family and provide for them, being the traditional, strong, masculine breadwinner, but also told that women were just as capable and powerful. As Bly puts it, it's clear to men that the images of adult manhood given by the popular culture are worn out. A man can no longer depend on them. By the time he's 35, he knows that the images of the right man, the tough man, the true man, which he has received in high school, do not work in life. Jack's journey, then, is a result of this confusion. Tyler is his representation of these cultural ideas, which are in conflict with the way that society functions today. Tyler, in order to survive, must destroy the system which rejects him. Thus, hypermasculinity, in order to survive, must change the system in which it exists. This brings new light to much of the misogyny the film engages with, not as legitimate hate, but as the representation of a newly superseded form of masculinity, lashing out against a society that will no longer tolerate it. Under this viewpoint, the film doesn't promote the superiority of masculinity, rather it interrogates the hypermasculine attitude promoted by Tyler, and he and his subsequent ideologies are something that must be killed in order for men and women to empathize with each other, as Jack and Marla come to do in the end. All the way back at the start of the movie, Jack's engagement with his own emotions through the support groups which he attends actually helps immensely. By learning to release his feelings instead of suppressing them, he finds the inner peace necessary to sleep at night, to calm himself. Yet when this solution is interrupted by Marla, Jack resorts to violence, a darker alternative release for his emotions, and one that leads to continually escalating consequences for him. Following Jack's descent into the Fight Club, he gains the respect of like-minded men and gains Marla's affection. Yet this comes at the cost of the lives of others and the destruction of the society in which he exists. For violence to be the appropriate solution, we would need to live in a completely different society. So while this is an option presented to solve the problem in the movie, the audience is not meant to come away from the movie believing this to be the correct solution. This is made clear in the film's finale, a confrontation between Jack and Tyler, and the resolution of Jack and Marla's relationship. Tyler is Jack's own personification of masculinity, as it has been defined by our culture. Yet, modern capitalistic society does not have a place for that brand of hypermasculinity anymore. In order to exist, Tyler needs that same system to be destroyed. But instead, Jack kills Tyler. If Tyler Durden represents violence and hypermasculinity, it is only by killing Tyler, removing that toxic masculinity and violence in his life, that Jack can once again find solace. After he's killed Tyler, he takes Marla by the hand and watches as the city explodes in front of them. Susan Faludi, the author of the book on disenfranchised men in modern society entitled Stiffed, had this to say about the finale in her review of Fight Club. When Jack sends the boys away in the final scene, and throws in his lot with the defiant, if deviant woman he's been afraid to court, he seems poised finally to begin life as an adult man. For men facing an increasingly hollow, consumerized world, that path lies not in conquering women, but in uniting with them against the hollowness. In that way, Fight Club ends up as a quasi-feminist tale, seen through masculine eyes. Upon closer inspection, then, Fight Club is actually moving in the complete opposite direction as some of its opponents believe it to be. In the finale, Jack chooses to reject Tyler so that he can be with Marla. He rejects the toxic masculinity which he has been fed, and which has convinced him that to be violent and vehemently anti-feminine is what it means to be a real man, instead choosing to connect with Marla, and as such, with femininity. Fight Club could be considered almost post-masculine, promoting the idea that our broader cultural conceptions of masculinity no longer fit into today's society, and thus they must be rejected, or at least work in tandem with femininity, instead of trying to dominate it. This is a shift finally being seen in more popular media today, to me exemplified by the rise of male protagonists as single fathers. Absentee fatherism has been shown to be a leading issue in the development of the male crisis in America, and media like The Last of Us, The Mandalorian, or The Road are showing what a masculine caregiver can look like. child rearing was typically seen as a feminine trait, but as women's fight for equity in the workforce and beyond gained more success, no thought was ever given to the instruction of new fathers and how to care for their children. Furthermore, little representation was given to these sorts of father figures in popular media. Typical sitcoms like Family Guy, The Simpsons, or American Dad have stay-at-home mothers and typically depict father figures as bumbling buffoons. It's only been a recent shift where we've seen father figures begin to be portrayed as positive parental examples for their children, biological or otherwise. Ultimately, the value of Fight Club comes from the interpretations of its feminist ideas, wherein men and women, masculinity and femininity, must come together as equals in order to achieve the happiness that our corporatized society has otherwise drained from our lives. In the vacuous meaninglessness of an IKEA catalog of existence, what more can we ask for than a hand to hold?